Anesthesiologists have read it. What was something you won't forget hearing from someone that was under? My husband was put under to get his wisdom teeth out. He was a little anxious and also is just kind of anal. Oh, he's an engineer. So he read his pre-op instructions front to back like a dozen times. One of the things it said was, "You may experience profound disorientation upon awakening." As he woke up, he opened one eye and looked around the room, then said extremely huffily, "I wouldn't call this profound." Then he started crying. Story 2. I was giving a young female patient sedation for a routine colonoscopy, and as I pushed the sleepy medicine, it started to hit her. She sat straight up and yelled to everyone in the procedure room, "I shaved my stuff for you." And she flopped down on her pillow, and she was asleep. Story 3. I was coming out of the fog of anesthesia from a colonoscopy. Apparently, I didn't recognize my wife and refused her affections, telling her she was pretty but I was married. Got big brownie points for that. Story 4. Anesthesiologist here. For better or for worse, I'm a big Green Bay Packers fan, so I wear a scrub cap with the Packers name colors on it. I was doing a pre-op evaluation on a kid who was a big New Orleans Saints fan, and when I walked into the room, his first words to me were, "Packers suck." I laughed and continued to prepare him and his family for his redo open-heart surgery procedure. Fast forward to surgery a couple days later, and his mom had come back to the OR as he was going to sleep. Given the fact this was a 3 or 4 time redo sternotomy, going into the chest again, he had a higher risk of major complications from the surgery. I started to push some meds to have him go to sleep while his mom was holding his hand, and as he drifted off, he said, "Wait, I have to tell my mom something." She got emotional, saying how much she loved him, and we were all waiting to hear what he had to say so urgently. I paused, giving him the medication, but he was already well on his way to being under, and as he drifted off to sleep, he said, "Packers suck. Kid did great, hope he is doing well." Story 5. My husband had his ACL and meniscus repaired. When they brought him back into the room, he stared at me through half-closed eyes until the nurses left and then said, "I love you. I'm glad you're here." I melted. Then he conked back out for about half an hour and woke up with a big gasp. I thought he was in pain, that's how loud it was, and went, "Burger King burger." I said, "You want a Burger King burger?" He said, "I do." So I had to get him a Burger King burger for dinner. He doesn't remember anything until he was back home several hours later with Burger King sitting in front of him. Story 6. Nurse here was 22 female. Had a teen boy come out of anesthesia who looked at me and said, "Hey, you're the girl from last night." I had to reassure everyone that that wasn't me. Story 7. I had a surgery to remove bone spurs from my big toes in early February of 2005. I woke up while the surgery and asked if he thought Donovan McNabb could lead the Eagles to a Super Bowl win. He nodded at the anesthesiologist, and I don't remember anything after that. Story 8. As I put someone out for a colonoscopy one time, the patient said, "You're cute. Are you going to see my butt?" Then she was out. For those of you asking, yeah, for colonoscopies, we typically use deep sedation. This is in the US. 99% of the time, this means propofol, the Michael Jackson. Most of us will give some lidocaine through your IV first. This helps prevent the burning sensation in your IV that propofol can sometimes give. And follow it right up with propofol to knock you out. Almost never need analgesics. Story 9. I gave a patient an IV dose of ketamine for a pain procedure. He proceeded to tell the room that everyone had turned into cartoon characters, and then he announced he was melting into a wall of butter. Still my finest achievement as a physician. Story 10. My wife was all doped up during her C-section and asked the anesthesiologist, "Did they open yet?" He calmly told her they did, to which she replied, "Aw, crap," with a huge grin on her face. The doctor and I lost it. Story 11. I'm sure the anesthesiologist that did my son's dental surgery will never forget him. Specifically, because he came out after the fact clearly trying very hard not to laugh, to tell my wife about it. Kiddo was just chatting away while he was getting ready. Now my son is autistic and at the time had a very distinct way of speaking and pattern of emphasis, along with a lisp. I literally cannot translate how he sounded talking into text. Imagine you had a soundboard of Butters from South Park that had all these words on it from vastly different conversations and strung them together into the sentences below, and you'll have a pretty decent idea of it. He sounds a bit different than my son, but it's about as close as I can get. Anyway, just as they're getting ready to put him under, he goes, "You're gonna need some hardcore nighttime medicine, because I have ADHD and out, practically snoring even." They get to work, finish up, and pull the mask off him. The literal second the mask was off his nose, he bolts upright and finishes his sentence from however long earlier. "That stuff don't work good on me." Story 12. One of my patients coming out of sedation embarrassed her husband, who was in the room, by saying that during their sex, he likes to have Vicks rubbed on his backside. Story 13, kind of on topic. When my mom woke up after having a stroke, the doctor asked if she recognized the people in the room. She got my sister's name right, called me my brother's name, and smiled real big at my stepdad and called him a hole. Story 14. My husband had knee surgery. After he woke up, he half yelled, half whispered apple juice, so the nurse gave him apple juice, several small cups full. He grinned like a toddler and said, apple juice, and immediately flopped back and went back to sleep for all of 10 minutes until he woke back up gasping that he couldn't breathe. His mom, who I had met maybe 1 or 2 times at this point, went up to the foot of his bed to grab a nurse in the doorway, and he bolted upright. That man projectile vomited pure apple juice directly into her face, body, the wall, the door, hallway. I have never seen anything like it in my entire life. His mom stood there soaked in juice vomit, and he just rubbed his eyes and said, I feel better. Bam. Back to sleep for another 2 hours. Story 15. A little girl was going under anesthesia, and she was holding her mother's hand. She reached out for my hand with her other, and as she was going out, she joined mine with her mother's and said, "You would be a nice daddy." I probably went beetroot red as I blushed. Story 16. My husband woke up from anesthesia after a colonoscopy just after the doctor walked in. He didn't see the doctor and told me, "No BJ for you," then fell back asleep and ripped a big fart. The doctor looked at me and busted out laughing. He said not to be embarrassed. People say the weirdest things, but this one, he'd remember. Story 17, was under anesthesia for a breast reduction. As I was coming out, my nurse was talking to me, and apparently I started saying, "It's an angel, and she looks like Barbie." I kept yelling for Barbie Angel and possibly kept trying to hug her and pet her hair. I cried for her on the way home. She called to check on me later that night and referred to herself as Nurse Barbie Angel. She was the sweetest. Story 18. My aunt, who notoriously despises fast food, old Mexican lady whose food is as good as it gets, woke up and looked at my uncle and said, "Are you the sexy man that's going to take me to McDonald's?" If you knew her, you would know that she would never say that. She has never lived it down. Story 19. I was under general anesthesia to get my gallbladder removed. As I was being wheeled back through the double doors, there was a giant TV screen that listed the surgeries going on. I was way too loopy to actually read it, but I swear I saw elbowectomy and started hysterically laughing over the idea of removing an elbow and being left with a floppy arm. Apparently, what I actually said was elboo jellu and then passed out. Story 20. Am an anesthetist. Woke up a 70-year-old PT who got a junk prosthesis implant for erectile dysfunction. First thing out of his mouth in his post-surgery stupor was to request a private room and find out when he could take this baby out for a test drive. He was a happily married jokester. Story 21. I got put under for my wisdom teeth at 17. When I came to, the nurse or whatever was like, "Okay, you're probably a little groggy, just sit tight for a while." And I was like, "Duck that. I feel amazing," and proceeded to swing my legs off the table, which sent my top half spinning right after it and falling flat on my face. People laughed. I remember the laughter. Story 22. A girl woke up and asked if she had been hit by a train, and then when asked if she knew why she was there, she looked down and patted her chest and said, "Implants." She was having her ACL repaired and her mom was there. It was me. I've never lived it down. Story 23. Patient here. Came out of anesthesia and heard Gautier's, somebody that I used to know, playing in the recovery room. I asked why they were playing it at like 10x the normal speed, and the nurse just goes, "Okay, so she's not ready to go home yet." Story 24. I was brought home after by my wife but was still loopy. She told the construction workers outside to make sure I didn't leave the house. They let me help pour concrete and fixed what I ducked up. Nice guys. My daughter made them free limeades, so they were always cool with us. Story 25. This guy I was dating, he asked me to take him to get his wisdom teeth removed. He told me that anesthesia doesn't affect him a lot, and we were supposed to go on a road trip the next day. So anyway, he gets wheeled out of the dentist by an old nurse. I'm behind the driver's seat and I see him smacking his lips, looking up at the sky. She opens my car door and he said, "I love her, I love her." He then proceeded to ask me to marry him several times. He tried to pull out his gauze and I told him stop, and he said, "Man, this Karen is bossy." Then he wanted a milkshake. I would suggest a place and he would scream no. Finally, we agree on a place and he tells me he'll give me directions. I drive for 15 minutes before I ask him what we're doing, and he said he has no idea. We're in the drive-thru and he says, "I have something for you." I swear I thought he had bought me a ring the way he had been proposing for last hour. It was his newly extracted teeth. "They let me keep them. I want you to have them." He lived on base at the time and was yelling at the gate while they checked his ID for them to hurry up. I finally get him to his room, in bed. He's happily eating his milkshake with a spoon. His mouth was a mess of milkshake. He asked me for a kiss. I gave him a peck. We're married now. Story 26. Patient here. Apparently before I went under, I kept mumbling, "It's buried, don't worry, stop worrying. It's buried, it's gone." My mom was there and said the staff were eyeballing her uncomfortably. And years later, to this day, every year she still asks me if remember anything. That if ever I need to talk, she'll support me no matter what. I honestly do not know what I meant. Story 27. Had my wisdom teeth out. When I woke up, I was so excited to get my now extracted teeth and keep them as a souvenir. The nurse said I couldn't. She wheeled me out to the front door where my wife was waiting to load me into the car. She saw my disappointed face and asked, "What's wrong, honey?" I turned and pointed to the nurse and said through my gauze-stuffed mouth, "This ducking Karen won't let me keep my teeth." My stunned wife apologized, and the nurse explained that it's fine, but they were a biohazard, to which I replied incredulously, "They were in my ducking mouth an hour ago." On a slightly related note, my meal has promised me that I can have her titanium hip after her cremation for a shifter in my car. Love that woman. Story 28. I'm an anesthesiologist. The best story was a 40-some-year-old woman for appendectomy, said while I'm giving the propofol to induce anesthesia. She said, "Oh, I don't remember it tasting like that before." Slurred. I said, "What does it taste like?" Since propofol doesn't usually elicit a taste reaction. She almost yelled nuts and was promptly under anesthesia thereafter. There have been other stories, but this one has the entire staff rolling laughing for minutes after she was under. Story 29. My husband had to undergo a colonoscopy, and when he came around, he started aggressively grilling the staff about Abraham Lincoln. He isn't a historian or anything. He works as a business analyst and knows next to nothing about Abraham Lincoln. Bonus story. One time he took Ambien and got super ducked up. Initially told me that he couldn't walk up the stairs to bed because he was a transformer and his legs had turned to wheels. Finally got him upstairs and he made the observation that if peach trees could sing to each other like whales, it would be beautiful. I bet they would sing Adele. Then he burst into tears. Story 30. I had an ovarian cyst removed a year ago and woke up from the anesthesia saying, hand, please, and making grabby hands with both my hands until the nurses finally came over and held my hands for about 5 minutes while I just smiled and tried to go back to sleep. I hadn't done that in a decade. I used to do it to my dad all the time as a kid to express that I wanted to hold his hand while I slept. Story 31. I've had to get colonoscopies every couple years since I was 24, so I've gone under quite a bit for someone my age. Every time when I wake up, I'm crying and a nurse is comforting me. They say I don't tell them why I'm upset, but I'm weeping every damn time. It has gotten to the point where I warn the nurses I'll be sobbing, but to not take it too seriously. Anyone else have this? I've learned. 1. I'm apparently very lucky to not be vomiting alongside the weeping too. I should tell my anesthesiologist about this reaction and they can switch up my substances and possibly help avoid this reaction in the future. 3. Not everyone gets put under for colonoscopies, and I think this may be a geographic difference. I'm in the US. Story 32. My mom woke up from dental surgery, and when we were leaving the surgeon's office, he gave her a goodie bag with floss and a toothbrush and stuff, and the whole way home, she kept asking if she could eat the candy that the dentist gave her. Every time I told her there was no candy, she looked so heartbroken, like a little kid when their goldfish dies or something. Then we stopped at CVS on the way home, and she wandered off. I found her in the candy aisle, holding a giant bag of fun-sized candy, and when I told her to put it back on the shelf, she dropped it on the floor and galloped away laughing at me. Story 33. Was recently under for abdominal surgery. My partner of 17 years, who I dearly love, was the first face I remember seeing when coming out of anesthesia. I looked at him and said, "Who the duck are you, and why are you staring at me?" He's still laughing. Story 34. I was 17 at the time, but got my wisdom teeth taken out. Everything went as planned, but I woke up and remember seeing the oral surgeon. Me, being dosed with grade A giggle juice and having no idea WTF I was doing, asked her if she would like to grab boba sometime. I've never been so embarrassed in my life. 5 years later, she let me shadow for part of my dental school shadowing requirement and is giving me a lure for applications next cycle. Not a boba date, but all things considered, she was a great mentor. Story 35. My boyfriend at the time had just gotten his wisdom teeth removed. On the ride home with his mouth full of gauze, he gets a call on his cell phone. He answered it and just starts talking away. Whoever it was on the other side could not possibly understand a word he was saying with all the gauze in his mouth. But man, he had a lot to talk about, and they apparently didn't hang up. After about 5 minutes of this unintelligible phone conversation, he looks at me and says, "Oh, it's a robot," and gives me the phone. I put it to my ear, and the whole time it's been the Walgreens pharmacy automated notice simply stating his prescription is ready for pickup, playing on repeat, probably for the best. Story 36. AM patient's relative rather than anesthesiologist. But as he started going under, patient, hydraulics engineer, started trying to tell the doctor what type of pump they should install to fix the busted blood vessel in his brain. Story 37. My dad is super resistant to anesthesia and most pain meds, which sucks for him. He warned them when he went to get his hip replaced, but evidently they ignored or underestimated his statement. Mid-hip replacement, he woke up, sat up in his seat, and attempted to hit the doctor. He got far closer than a man in his condition should have. When I say mid-hip replacement. The hip was fully replaced. Story 38. I have no recollection of this, but according to my mom, when she met me in the recovery room after wisdom tooth extraction, I was very eager to tell her something, but my mouth was full of gauze. So they gave me a pen, and I wrote something on the surgical bib. Hours later, when I was back in reality, she asked me, "What was with the meow meows, my son?" I had no idea what she was talking about, so she showed me the bib. It said, "Meow Meow," the Meow Mix theme. Story 39. I had a guy, nefarious character, heavy substances use history, who got a bunch of ketamine, probably too much, in recovery from one of the other docs to help with severe pain after his abscess drainage. I was asked to check on him in an hour as the other doc had left for the evening. Went over and saw him in the K-hole drooling on himself, but otherwise fine, so I left and came back an hour later. First thing he says to me is, "Why did you do that to me?" I asked him what he meant, and he said, "You don't understand. I lived another man's life in there." I apologized and asked him, "How long do you think you were in there?" For reference, it had been something like an hour and a half or 2 hours since his trip began. I don't know, maybe 30 years. I was speechless. I apologized again, made sure he knew he was safe, made sure he wasn't hurting, and made damn sure he knew it wasn't me that did it to him. Story 40. One time a male biology student in his early 20s with a stuck kidney stone, was being put under for surgery. Just as the anesthesiologist was pushing meds and telling me to count back from 100, I looked up at him in a drugged but focused gaze and said, "You're so pretty. You could be in movies." Then blackness. Anesthesiologist was like a grizzled 70-year-old hunched back looking guy with a lopsided grimace and more ear hair than head hair. Great doc though. Very last thing I remember hearing was the nurses cracking up laughing. It was a smallish medical community and I knew some of the people there. So, as a joke, somebody snuck his headshot into my chart. I like to think it was him gunning for a second career though. Story 41. I had a colonoscopy last month and woke up rested and totally lucid. Bummer. However, when my husband had his vasectomy after our son was born, they gave him a local, it's an outpatient procedure, and some Valium and pain meds after. He was loopy. I stopped at Walgreens to fill his prescription and he said, as he led in the passenger seat with the ice pack on his stuff, "Hey, will you get me a Coke?" I nod. "And some Doritos?" I nod again and go to leave car. "And some Oreos? And some Reese's Cups? And some Twizzlers?" We were 38, well behind junk food years, not stoners, and he was 6'2" and 170. Not obese or a binge eater. I said, "Are you serious?" And he grinned drunkenly and said, "Yeah." I grabbed the baby carrier and said, "I'm taking the baby with me." He literally did finger guns. This man is a college professor who wears bow ties. I buy his snacks and painkillers and head back outside, and he is telling a guy at the red box video kiosk next to our car that his urologist said he had the best kind of junk for the procedure because his shaft is very straight and uniform. I took him home quickly, gave him his snacks, and let him sleep it off. He woke up hours later covered in candy wrappers with orange Dorito fingers and asked, "What happened?" That was 13 years ago, and it's still the best. Story 42. My son was coming to after being under when getting his broken wrist set and casted. They had to do traction to get everything aligned or something. There were quite a few people in the room, but his drug self directed all his attention to me. He was describing Big Daddy from BioShock and kept repeating, "Dad, you know what I'm talking about," because I couldn't think of the name of the game at the time. Then he gets frustrated and yells at me, "You son of a Karen!" Lots of laughs from the hospital staff. Story 43. Surgeon told me that I kept them all laughing through my facial surgery. They had to keep giving me more anesthetic to shut me up, which is probably why I was sick as a dog afterwards. I pressed him hard for details, but he refused to tell me what I'd said. Story 44. How about the other way around? I took my mom for her surgery on her right shoulder, and her anesthesiologist was this very dignified, solemn, older Persian gentleman. My mom told him, "Just so you know, I wrote directions on myself to make sure you get it right." She was joking around, but she actually does this old battle axe nurse habits die hard. He looked her straight in the eye and said deadpan, "Great, so let's get started on your left knee." Totally got her. It was great. Story 45. My aunt got rushed to the hospital for abnormal heart rate, but it wasn't a heart attack or stroke, but her heart was going at like 200 beats per minute or whatever it was. They had to put her under so they could shock her heart back to normal. As they're taking her under, the doctor says something like, "Okay, in it goes," and she immediately quips with, "That's what she said." All the doctors and nurses busted a gut, laughing, and told my uncle when he got there. He just shrugged and said, "That's my wife for you." Story 46. One summer I was home from college, and my dad needed me to pick him up after his very first colonoscopy. He was nervous, so I got there early. The nurse called me back and asked me to help wake him up, as they were having some trouble. I go back and am making chit-chat. "Oh, Dad, you've got those cool booties on." He raised his head a little bit to look at them, then yelled, "Booty call!" He is a Presbyterian pastor. a moment I will treasure forever. Story 47. As a 17-year-old, I had a colonoscopy because GI doctors couldn't figure out why I couldn't go too. I mention this as an important detail because after the colonoscopy, I was still very much under the anesthesia effects, loopy. And when my mom tried to offer saltines, I started screaming, "How many calories do those things have?" And my mom starts panicking like, "Calm down, lower your voice. People are gonna think you have an eating disorder or something." And I just said, "I can't talk quiet, what's going on?" The ironic thing was, I guess besides dysregulating my ability to control vocal volume, the anesthesia kind of acted like a truth serum in a way. No one found out I had an eating disorder until I almost passed from it a year later. But I can't believe that wasn't taken into consideration as to why I couldn't go to the bathroom. Can't poop if you don't eat. Story 48. Not an anesthesiologist, but a story from my mom about me while I was under. I had a double jaw surgery scheduled for April 21st, 2016. The procedure was fine. I remember waking up halfway through it and getting more anesthesia. After the surgery ended, they put me into the hospital room to let the medics wear off. I don't remember much of this time, so this comes from my mom, but she was sitting in the room with me, watching the news on the TV. I wake up and I'm quiet for a little bit before I start sobbing. My mom thinks it's because my mouth hurts. My mouth is wired shut, so I actively can't correct her with words and have to try and write out on paper what I'm crying about. The news was broadcasting about Prince's death, and I was hysterical over the fact that I'd apparently killed Prince and that I had to turn myself in. Story 49. I was under anesthesia to get my wisdom teeth removed. When I was slowly waking up, I heard the nurses talking about Hakeem Olajuwon. I started talking about which Rockets I knew, how I knew Rudy T. They're all like, "Yeah, you do, okay. My girlfriend is sitting there laughing with them, playing along as if I'm so high and talking crap. In reality, I was a bartender at a place where they would frequent. I knew all those guys, and my girlfriend ducking knew I knew them. She just thought the whole situation was so funny, though, that she didn't just say something like, "No, he's serious, it's true." Story 50. I had a rough labor and delivery with my first baby, and they had given me several shots of pain meds. I had 3 days of labor, back labor, Charlie horses in the calves of my legs, and ultimately, a forceps delivery. Yeah, this was back in 1977. I was so drugged up and exhausted by the delivery. The doctor was finally stitching me up, and someone in the room commented that maybe I wouldn't have such a hard time the next baby. I vaguely remember lifting my head partway off the table and told the doctor to stitch me all the way up and we wouldn't have to worry about the next time. The room erupted in laughter, and as I threw my head back down, I was so pissed they were laughing because I was serious. P.S. I had 2 more babies a few years later. Story 51. My personal story. When I had my wisdom teeth out, I kept holding a fake camera up to my face, saying, "You're beautiful," and making clicking noises while I was under. I'm a professional photographer, and my dental surgeon ended up booking a session with me a year later. Story 52. When coming out of it, I was really angry. My fiance was trying to steal my ice cream. I didn't have any ice cream, but I was convinced he was trying to steal it. Story 53. I was injected with something to loosen me up before they rolled my bed into the operating room. My bed was pretty wide and definitely comfortable. The nurse says to me, "Okay, we're going to move you over to the skinny table now." The reason she called the operating table the skinny table was because it was narrow compared to my bed. My brain interpreted it differently though, so I asked, "Skinny table? Where do you take the fat patients?" Story 54. I was part of the operating theater team. There was a girl in her late 20s like me, and we had a good laugh when I went to bring her down from the ward. I think I might have brought her into the procedure room too, but at that point, the doctors would have been talking to her. Afterward, when she was in the recovery room, she was just after waking up, so I went to check on her. She smiled at me and screamed, "Hey, Nardonski, check it out. How big is my junk now? Is it huge?" And then just kind of went back to sleep while I held my laughs till I got to a less public place. The fun thing about anesthesia and post-op is while you're still high as a kite, there's a decent chance you'll have some idea of what you were saying. The next day, I was on the same ward collecting another person across from her, so I decided to say hi. She was sitting with her mom, so I just asked how she was feeling, etc., and then asked if she remembered what she had said to me in the recovery room. The girl turned bright red and just started laughing at that point. Story 55. I once came out of anesthesia after an endoscopy, which can cause you to burp pretty much the whole day. And my fiance asked, "How are you doing?" I misheard and answered as though she said, "What are you doing?" My answer was little burps, said very confidently. I also started crying on the way home because I wanted one egg. I never crave eggs. Story 56. Patient here. I was getting my wisdom teeth out, and before I went under, I told them that bananas are radioactive. When I woke up, I proceeded to repeat that several times and explain radioactivity. Story 57. I was giving birth, and I told the entire medical staff to go duck themselves, then turned my head and told the anesthesiologist, "Not you, though. I like you." Story 58. Apparently, when I had surgery to remove my Bartholin's gland, a gland at the entrance of the pussy that can get an abscess, they asked me how I felt as soon as I was awake. I said I felt like I got ducked and then I wanted to hug everyone. Story 59. I was put under for a few surgeries. The first one I saw a pile of seats or something and I started talking about how they looked like laser tag guns and invited him to go play laser tag after. The second was for a hysterectomy, and when I got wheeled into the room drugged up, I screamed, "Time for everyone to see my stuff! Get excited!" My oncologist said it made her day. Story 60. PACU, post-anesthetic care unit. Nurse here. I get everyone from OT come my way, so I have a few good ones. 1. A teen around 14 years old wakes up to the world on a mix of medics. First thing he does is look at me and says, "Yo, I'm alive?" I replied, "I sure hope you are." Or, "I'm in the wrong job, mate." To which he then proceeded to dap me up and everyone around him. He then goes on to try and smoke up his blood pressure cuff by rolling it like a cigarette. 2. A colleague of mine was looking after a 21-year-old male from the military who had some form of renal stenting, to which you get a camera snaked up your old fella if you're a man. Anyway, my colleague in their lack of thinking leaves their phone by the bedside, while this man uses a urinal bottle. This man proceeds to take about 10 plus selfies of him starkers with his meat and 2 veg on full view on my colleague's phone. The best part was they didn't find the photos till 2 hours later. 3. A 4-year-old child comes into the OT to be inducted for a broken arm. The anesthetist decides to use sevoflurane, sleepy gas, to put the kid to sleep. After one breath, the kid turns to us and goes, "So this is what Mummy's special juice is like." To which he then promptly blacks out, with all of us in hysterics, and Mum, who was there in OT for induction, red-faced. Story 61. Can I tell an ambient story? It fits the spirit of the question. My mom worked the night shift for 15 years and couldn't sleep during the day, so her doctor prescribed her some Ambien so she could get some rest. I was maybe 12 or so at the time. So, one day, she poked her head into my room when she should have been sleeping with the most zonked out expression I've ever seen. Just opened my door, stared at me like a zombie, then shuffled away. She must have done the same thing to my little sister, 8, because she came into my room a second later, clearly horrified. We found my mom in the kitchen, sitting on the bench at the table in a daze. I grabbed the camcorder because this was too weird. We tried to get her to go to bed, but she refused until we got her a cup of milk. We did, but she didn't drink it, just stared at it. So we helped her up and told her we were taking her to bed. She refused again and would only agree if she could put on her slippers. Fine. We walked her to her slippers, but she claimed she couldn't wear them because she only had 2 slippers but 4 feet. I told her no, she's got 2 feet like everyone. She got irritated because she could obviously see 4 feet, like a dog, and she wasn't a dog. So we told her to put 2 of her feet in and go barefoot with her extra feet. She started doing a weird shuffle jump, trying to get both feet into her slippers at the same time. Eventually, we managed to get her to bed. She remembered none of this when she woke up hours later. Luckily, I had the whole ordeal on tape, which she refused to watch out of embarrassment. She never took Ambien again. Story 62. If they're talking while they're under, then I probably don't have them deep enough for real though. Once in school, I was putting a lady to sleep and we all have our little spiel, we say. I had the mask on her face, pushing propofol in her IV, and I tell her, "Okay now, nice big breaths." She looks up at me and says, "Thanks, I just had them done," and then goes out. I look at my preceptor and the circulator who are ducking, dying, laughing. I get my crap together and intubate her, and then laugh my balls off. To this day, when I put someone to sleep, I change my spiel to slow, deep breaths instead. I will never forget that lady. Story 63. Not an anesthesiologist, but I had my wisdom teeth out last week and accused the very nice nurse of being a liar. She said I wouldn't even remember the doctor coming in, and the first thing I, legibly, said was about how I remembered him coming in and putting a face shield on, and how offended I was that he felt the need to be so protected from my face juices. I also cried upon learning my dog wasn't home. Thought the government was hiding the fact that there was a bucket of spinach outside of my front door. It was leaves, and no, the Canadian government did not secretly put spinach in my house, and waved at multiple terrified bystanders. Oh, and I also told the nurse, while in the elevator, to stay away from another doctor in the building, because he's not a very nice guy. True. Story 64. I woke up from gallbladder surgery, confused as to why my mom wasn't there. I was 18 and looking for my mom. The nurse informed me I'd cussed out my entire family, and they sent them home and put me on a no-visitor list, only for me to wake up at 2 a.m. with no memory making them call my mom back. Another time I woke up and made horrifically inappropriate jokes. I told a nurse she was pissing me off because I didn't like the automatic blood pressure cuff. Another, I refused to listen to follow-up orders until I had a chicken sandwich. My negotiations were not met. I'm a real treat after anesthesia, but I get a lot of this done at the office my mom works at so she can warn them. Story 65. Not an anesthesiologist, but this really rocked me. At the time, I had become really great friends again with my ex. He had been diagnosed with cholangiocarcinoma, and the first treatment was aggressive, removing 2/3 of his liver. After he was diagnosed, I was his main man for all visits and care, and very happily so. So, the day comes for his surgery, and it took a very unnerving 4 hours. I had friends there to support me, thankfully. Finally, someone comes to me and says, "We're all done, and he's asking to see you," with a smile. Although we weren't technically together then, apparently, he had been asking for his boyfriend. As I walk in, I can hear him singing "Stand Back" and alternating that with "Oh, duck." When I finally got to him, he opened his eyes, sees me, and in the most genuine way anyone will ever tell it to me, says, "I love you." I bawled as he fell asleep, then laughed every time he'd wake up, ask what happened, sing "Stand Back," and yell, "Oh, duck." I married that man and knew that I would that day. Story 66. After an operation on a patient's neck, he woke up and yelled, "Ugh," then grabbed his junk with both hands and was like, "Oh, it's still there," then immediately passed out again. Story 67. Patient here. I got fentanyl in my IV, and the last thing I remember was saying, "Wow, this is the good stuff." He laughed and then woke up in post-op. Story 68. Patient here. My first C-section was hard. As the spinal set in and I realized I couldn't feel my legs, my husband, who hadn't been brought in the room yet but was outside waiting, said he could hear me trying to fight the doctors. Apparently my fight or flight kicked in, so they put me all the way under, for which I'm grateful for because I did hemorrhage and almost didn't make it myself. It was a real fun conversation to have in preparation for my next C-section though. Story 69. I woke up from being shocked to reset my heart and started yelling, "Hey, hey!" The nurse replied, "What?" I said, "My chest really hurts." She replied, "That's because we just shocked you." I said, "Oh," and passed TF out again. Story 70. My dad also asked the doctor during a colonoscopy that if he could have pictures of the inside of his stuff to show his friends as a prank. Needless to say, they love when he has any appointments. Story 71. I don't wake from anesthesia well at all. Apparently, I get very angry and try to escape by force if necessary. I'm a large man, and apparently, they have had to call in multiple security people to hold me down until I'm totally awake. I have no memory of this. We learned, however, that if my wife is present when I become conscious, I just become a giant, quiet teddy bear. I apparently just stare at her and quietly tell her I love her, and anything she says, I just go along with it without question. We know this because I was apparently yelling and throwing things trying to escape the hospital after a surgery. Again, I have literally zero memory of this ever happening, and the wife heard me from in the waiting area. She walked over to see what was going on, but the second I saw her, I apparently just stopped in my tracks and said, "Oh, hi, I love you," and then just became totally calm and compliant. After that, because I had to have multiple surgeries on the same arm, they always made sure she was waiting for me when I woke up. Story 72. Not a tech, but I have 2 stories about waking up from anesthesia and saying dumb stuff. First time I told the nurse, she was a pretty face to wake up to. Not too bad, but still cringe-worthy. The second, though, I remember telling this woman who had a mostly full sleeve that someone mangled her arm and I hope she didn't pay money for those tattoos. I still lose sleep at night over those. Story 73. I came out from knee surgery and immediately asked for my kitty cat. The nurse said, "What?" I said, "Where's my kitty cat? I want my kitty cat." Ow. She assumed I was still dopey until my wife rounded the corner and said, "I'm his kitty cat." She is. She's a Leo, and I've called her that for 19 years. Story 74. There's a song by Pepper that my brothers and I quote to each other. "What's wrong with you, face?" We will randomly say it to each other. My dad was going in for spinal fusion, and during the surgery prep, my youngest brother and I kept saying it to each other. Hey, so I know you stubbed your toe the other day, but what's wrong with your face? My dad goes in for surgery and all goes well. Surgeon comes out and talked to him during recovery and says, "Normally I don't discuss with patients what they say coming out of anesthesia, but I have to know why you kept asking me what's wrong with my face over and over again." My dad just burst out laughing and explained. They both had a chuckle. Story 75. I was coming out of anesthesia and my mom was there in the room. She is Scottish with a thick accent. She asked how I was, and then I began to giggle and told her she talked funny. She laughed and asked me another question, and I just kept laughing at her. Then when the nurse was checking my blood pressure, I asked her if she was playing the bagpipes for me. It was weird, but I kind of remember it in pieces. Story 76. A friend of mine was doing a type of spine procedure where they fixed part of a broken vertebrae under sedation. He said most people fall right asleep, but every now and then someone just won't fall asleep, no matter how much IV anesthesia they get. This guy that he was doing the procedure on got so talkative that he was just going on and on about his favorite fishing spots while he was having his broken vertebra fixed. My friend kept asking him if he was in pain or anything, but the guy was like, "I don't feel anything." Anyways, let me tell you about this place I bass fish. Guy had the whole procedure awake despite lots of anesthesia and was happy as a clam. Story 77. I had my wisdom teeth removed at 19, and it was a major surgery with a hospital stay because I had 2 full sets stacked on top of each other. Not sure the medical stuff, but I now have a plate in my face on the right side. Anyways, I was pretty nervous going in, and they gave me something strong to relax me before wheeling my away. I apparently said I was too old to be kidnapped. When I woke in the bed afterwards, I accused the nurse of stealing my kidney, and I was going to sue before promptly passing out again. Story 78. Before I went under, they had Beatles music on in the background of the OR. A day in the life, to be specific. I worked in the hospital and knew a lot of the OR staff, so I figured they just knew I was a big Beatles fan. Anyway, when I woke up in recovery, I told my nurse to thank whoever had put the Beatles on during the surgery. She looked at me very puzzled and said there was no music on at any point before or during the surgery. So I guess I hallucinated the majority of a day in the life while really high on medics in the OR. Story 79. Should be noted my mom has an extremely high tolerance to anesthesia. When she was 3 or 5, she had an open heart surgery. About halfway through, she woke up and watched them for a moment and then scared the crap out of her surgeon by asking what something was. 20 years later, she walked into his office with little baby me, and at first he tried kicking her out saying, "No, get out, I do pediatrics, not adults," and then saw my little cleft-lipped self and said, "There's another one of you?" A few years later, I was having a face or wrist surgery, and while they waited to make sure I was fully out, inherited some of my mom's tolerance. I apparently started telling them that different things were stupid, like their scrubs, how cold the stethoscope and room were, and how my stuffed toy duck agreed with me. I remember absolutely none of this, but the doctors recounted it to my mom, and I'm teased for it. Then, when I was about 10, I believe I was coming out of it, and touched my thumb to my pinky, and was very proud of my accomplishment. At my last major surgery, as I finally woke up, I had the oxygen tubes in my nose because I kept forgetting to breathe. When my doctor told me, I informed him that oxygen is bullcrap. Man had known me since before I could talk, and just a few months later, I was loopy BC needles. Aren't my friend, and he had to deal with me laughing for like 10 minutes because his student said, "The length of the needle doesn't matter, it's the girth," which was the last time I was his patient. On a cute note though, we made plaster molds of my hands before and after the main chunk of my hand surgeries and gave them to him. Made the otherwise stoic man sob, and they were still displayed on his desk the last time I was there. Story 80. Not an anesthesiologist, but this is my little story. When I was being put under for my wisdom teeth, I started to have an anxiety attack. I have general anxiety disorder, and pain in my left arm is usually a sign of anxiety coming on. Don't worry, my heart is healthy, it's just nerve damage. So my left arm was going numb, and I started to freak out. The doctor decided to give me some laughing gas to calm me down, and when I started giggling and laughing, everyone else calmed down, and my surgeon was ready for me to go to sleep. Well, the room spun, and suddenly, I went into fight or flight mode and began to struggle to get out. I don't really remember much, but I was screaming and thrashing. Nurses and doctors were called to hold me down. Absolute pandemonium. Mind you, I'm a short, skinny 18-year-old, but I'll tell you that anxiety makes you pretty strong when you want to leave. So as I'm going under, I'm still fighting and screaming, even unconscious, and the nurses are escorting my mom out, even though technically I wasn't really under. I woke up when the surgery was done, confused and very quiet. The nurse told me that I looked very sleepy and unsure of where I was, and right as she was going to call my mom, I asked for a woman named Claudia. I don't know any Claudias though, so it was kind of weird. I was a zombie. You could have me do anything and I would have done it. As we were leaving, my mom overheard one of the surgeons say, "I have never seen someone fight the anesthesia like that before." So that's my little claim to fame in the dentist field, as someone who almost got himself killed to free himself from anesthesia. Story 81. My sister one summer when she was 5 got her big toe caught in a bicycle chain while being rode double. It nearly severed it off. It was hanging by a piece of skin. After they got her to the ear and gave her pain meds, she's kept screaming and yelling, "Duck you, I hate you, Shell. You not my friend no more." Shell is the neighbor girl who was riding her double on the bicycle. My mother was mortified that her 5-year-old daughter was cussing and screaming like that. They finally got her calmed down and gave her a coloring book and crayons. She tried to eat the brown crayon BC. She thought it was a candy bar. Then, on the way home, she started singing Jingle Bells and pointing at the traffic lights saying how pretty the Christmas lights were. Me and my brother still make fun of her. "Duck you, shell you, not my friend no more." Story 82. My cousin had a horse fall on her femur, absolutely shattering it. Surgery was needed and they had to put in 3 bolts along with the other hardware. She woke up mid-surgery, sat up and said, "What's that?" She said the surgeon nearly jumped out of his skin. She couldn't feel anything, so the surgeon gave her a quick tour of where they were at in the surgery before putting her back under. Story 83. I was called to help with an ortho procedure for a middle school-aged boy, 13 or 14 maybe. I was on call, and it was a night case, so I went to see him in pre-op holding area and asked him and his family about medical history, etc. before we took him to the OR. He was quiet and let mom do all the talking, which isn't terribly uncommon for that age or for that time of night. I finish asking all my questions and start to roll him back to the OR. And as is custom, I try to get the kid to warm up to me a little bit by asking simple, easy questions. Kid gave me nothing, barely a moan or a shrug. All right, no big deal. He's either nervous or shy or tired. I'll just do what I need to do. Whole time setting him up, putting on ECG leads, pulse ox, pre-oxygenating, he says nothing. I go to induce him with the anesthetic and let him know he'll be asleep in a few seconds. He takes the medicine like a champ. Propofol burns like an unfair. People just don't remember it after surgery. Then all of a sudden, he sits up and at the top of his lungs, he screams, "I'm going to sleep," then lays back down. That was it. When it happened, the nurse in the OR is just trying to make sure he doesn't fall out of bed or rip an IV out. But as soon as she can tell he's out, we just look at each other and lose it. Most insane thing I've witnessed in my 6-ish years experience. Story 84. I got my gallbladder removed a couple years ago. I remember waking up and a nurse was there and she said, "I'll bet you're glad you'll never see me again," and angrily huffs out of the room. And I have no idea what I did. And now I'm self-conscious that I'm an a-hole while under anesthesia. Story 85. Not exactly what you asked for, but when I was young, I had knee surgery, and when I woke up, I remember loudly yelling for my mama. I was like 17 or so. I tried to jump out of the bed and run for it, which didn't happen since one of my legs was in a full cast. I was later told that was the second time I woke up. The first time I didn't say a word, but I did punch a nurse in the face. She showed me the black eye the next day. I felt terrible, but in her words, "Don't worry, baby. It happens." Story 86. I came out of anesthesia, and I tried to move my arms, but I couldn't. So I assumed my arms were now fused together. My biggest worry? Where would I get shirts and how would I put them on? Then the team asked me to move to a chair they had put right in front of me. I said, "Wait, what chair? Oh, that one? The chair right in front of me? Okay, wait, this chair?" Story 87. When I came out for my colonoscopy, my nurse was giving me the lowdown, and I was still very high, still sober enough to understand my surroundings, etc. She told me that I would be high and that I shouldn't make any big rash decision. Right at that moment, my wife walked in and I said, "Wife's name, I love you. Will you marry me?" The nurse was like, "Oh, duck knew. We're a young couple and don't wear wedding rings." So in that moment, I was cracking a joke that only my wife would understand. Story 88. My mom is a very sweet, kind, old lady. She is tiny, just over 5 feet and built like a ballerina, although she's getting close to 60. She has never hurt a fly. She always tries to find compromise and will always help others more than herself. She's quiet, easygoing, you get the idea. Anyway, she told the nurse to shut up and then punched the doctor in the face when he said she might need more anesthesia. Story 89. My husband told me that while I was in the recovery room after shoulder surgery, I was talking to the nurses with my eyes closed, and I asked everyone I interacted with if they had dogs. One nurse started telling me about her Great Danes. I asked to see pictures, and while she was getting her phone out, I was making jokes about how they're like horses. Then I went on a tangent about how horse girls are so weird, and they always seem to have braids. Then she said, "Oh, well, I have horses too. I guess I am sort of weird." And I opened my eyes to see a lovely nurse with a very long braid. I was dying and tripping all over myself to apologize, and she just happily scrolled through some pictures of her giant dogs and horses for me. She was too kind. Story 90. I woke up while a group of doctors and nurses were resetting my dislocated and broken ankle. I remember my body shaking back and forth as they were trying to set it. I tried my hardest to speak and was able to say, "I am with you." The doctor looked startled, and I fell back asleep. Story 91. Only somewhat related, but my father had to know a lot of defense-related security stuff for his last job. And once after he had surgery, the doc said, "Wow, you had some interesting things to say." And to this day, he doesn't know if he blabbed something to the doc or if the doc was just joking. The doc saying that really pissed him off. Story 92. My own colonoscopy. I was told the sedative would make me forget everything that was about to happen. I started feeling really good and suddenly realized that since I was thinking about that very moment, then I was also remembering it in an hour when I was waking up, which made me think there is no time. Insert Ted Logan. Whoa, wave here. Then I woke up and started listing bird facts. Did you know a bluebird isn't really blue? Its feathers actually have gray pigment, but the structure of the feather causes light to bend in such a way that you see blue. Mostly the same for green, too. Retites are the only truly flightless birds. There are 5 of them: ostrich, emu, rhea, cassowary, and anyone. The kiwi. Psittacini have small brains, but they are packed full of neurons. Story 93. I got hit by a car who didn't spot me in the rain. I wasn't exactly under, but I was high on adrenaline and disoriented. So, in the ambulance, with my crying mother and concerned drivers, I loudly stated that I had farted. The ambulance driver told my mom it's the first time anyone told him that Story 94. Had to take my dad home from a colonoscopy. Quickly after returning to the room, he woke up, looked at me with the most intense glare ever and said, "I need to crap." Went and got a nurse who told me to walk with him into the bathroom. Once he got situated, I turned around and faced the door. My dad proceeded to let out an uninterrupted 30-plus second fart. It was the most impressive display of flatulence I've ever heard in both power and length. Once it was over, he let out the happiest sigh of relief, and I ducking lost it. Crying laughing, I got him up and back into bed where he slept for another 30 minutes. He didn't remember a thing. Story 95. Woke up from nasal surgery, strapped to the bed, and a very disgruntled anesthesiologist standing over me. He asked if I was awake now, and we talked for a minute. He asked me to do everyone a favor if I ever had surgery again, and used the words "wakes combative" when describing how I come out of it. Story 96. Patient here. My teeth were shaking and doctor said, "Don't be afraid." I was freezing, not afraid. Couldn't answer because they put a thing in my mouth for the gastroscopy. Story 97. I dislocated my finger on a cruise ship after playing basketball out the front of the rooftop nightclub at about 2 a.m. Took ages to get to the infirmary and wake some staff. I'd had it before, but this one was bad, and I wanted someone competent putting it back. The doctor says he is going to give me local anesthetic because it was pretty complicated and won't be quick to put back in. I was 18, so my mother ended up being called down to join my girlfriend. As he is injecting the local, he looks at me with the panic and says, "Have you been drinking?" Yes, I was plastered. And that was the last thing that I remember. I'm not sure what happened after, but my mom and girlfriend told me that I needed a wheelchair to get back to the room because I was paralytic and drooling all over myself. By the time we got there, I was getting better and decided it would be a good time to shave. I ended up almost fighting with them both to let me shave at 4 a.m. while off my face on a rocking boat. They managed to talk me out of it somehow. Security guards would giggle whenever I walked past them for the rest of the trip. A lot of them saw me in the wheelchair. Ha ha ha. Story 98. This isn't mine, but a relative of mine went for wisdom teeth removal. And apparently while he was recovering, still under a lot of anesthesia, started singing the American anthem, "We're Canadian," and told someone else in the room that he was a marshmallow Story 99, not an anesthesiologist. But I am an OBGYN and my husband is a general surgeon. I needed a colonoscopy and my husband was a resident at the time and scrubbed in with the surgeon. Colonoscopy went fine. I woke up screaming, "I need diluted," and my husband freaked out because he thought I had been perforated and thought I needed emergency surgery. I just wanted more substances. I was fine. I even yelled at the CRNA to give me the good stuff. I should mention I was an attending physician at this facility. Story 100. Not a doctor, just a patient. I was in the hospital for knee surgery. I was both nervous and curious. It was a teaching hospital. When the anesthesiologist came in, I peppered her with questions. I apologized, and she said, "I wish my students would ask me this many good questions." She then explained that she would give me IV Valium just before I was wheeled into the operating room to relax me. So they start wheeling me down the hallway, and the Valium starts kicking in. I remember saying, "Holy crap, this is absolutely ducking fabulous. Can you hook me up with this at home?" She laughed, said no, and that's one of the last things I remember before waking up. Story 101. I went under for a sigmoidoscopy and potential hemorrhoid banding, but before going under, they asked if I could turn further on my side so they could angle the light better. My response, "That's the first time lights shined up it, not out of it." And then one other thing I said when they asked me to move my robe further apart and apologized for it, nakedness, I said, "It's fine. The outside of my butt's great. It's the inside that's the problem." Story 102. My father is anesthesiologist. I used to be an oral surgeon. This lady had a dialogue with this guy she was sleeping with, saying that her son could be his. The guy in the room was her husband. The lady was in her late 60s back then. She was very hard to understand due to the inflammation. When her husband asked, "What did she say?" My dad said, "She was asking for water." Story 103. Maybe 4 months after getting out of an abusive marriage, I had surgery for a bad hernia. Had it for years, but my ex always put barriers in the way of getting it fixed. Post-surgery, I was in recovery and all of the nurses were joking about which Hogwarts house they would be in. I piped up, "My ex-wife thought I was a house elf," and drifted back under to lots of laughter. Story 104. My dad. After his second hip replacement, they were eating meatballs after they'd been in a drawer. Boy, that kid had a doughy rump. Coffee. People say things funny. People say things funny at church. coffee, cookies. He passed out after each of these. Story 105, patient here. When I woke up after my wisdom tooth surgery, I started crying about being robber. Called the doctor a thief and the anti-tooth fairy. Kept crying about how I'm gonna be dumb now without my wisdom teeth, and I won't even be able to pay for college because the devil doctor stole my teeth, and now the tooth fairy won't give me money. Story 106, Olmeo. I got my wisdom teeth out, and when I woke up, all I could think was, where's my dad? Why isn't he here? And I ended up crying over the fact my dad was gone. Turns out he was standing next to me and I was just high as crap. Story 107, here it goes. 2 years ago, my boyfriend, 25 years old, went in to get all 4 wisdom teeth pulled. Dropped him off and went home. 2-3 hours and the nurse calls me because he is ready to be picked up. I'm bringing this up because I can clearly hear him yelling in the background. He is arguing with the doctor and is upset he's bleeding in his mouth and wants said doctor to fix it. I arrive, let the nurse know I'm ready, and wait. Here comes 2 nurses carrying him to the truck. Blood seeping out of his mouth, drool all over his shirt, bad bedhead, and an obviously drugged up boyfriend. I start laughing. They open up the truck door and let me know that he is one feisty patient. Apparently after the procedure, when he was awake, the doctor stated, I'm going to put this gauze in your mouth, okay? Is that a threat? Then started to complain that there was blood in his mouth and to make the bleeding stop. When the doctor said, there is nothing he can do to fix that, my boyfriend then shouted. Then put my wisdom teeth back. Before he got out to the truck, he asked one of the nurses if I would notice the blood and drool. Oh, I definitely didn't notice. Was a fun and bloody experience. Story 108. I was waking up after surgery and they brought my wife back to see me. The nurse asked, is this your wife? I said, yeah. Oh wait, I should have said no and gotten a nicer one. The only reason I'm still alive is because I was waking up from a vasectomy I had at my wife's request. Story 109. I'm not an anesthesiologist, but very recently I had major surgery and then a subsequent emergency surgery because I later proceeded to nearly pass, twice. As I was going under for the emergency surgery, despite the fact I was bleeding horrifically, I demanded everyone tell me their favorite color. I was relieved to hear someone had the same favorite color as me. Story 110. I had knee surgery years ago, and I had been joking around with the nursing team about not feeling the anesthesia. They got my bed moving, and I jokingly put my arms up like I was on a roller coaster. And that was the last thing I remembered until I came out of it in recovery. The nurse there thanked me for the laugh, as I apparently passed out mid-woo, and my arms simply flopped out to the side. I went back a few weeks later for a follow-up, and the nurse looked at me deadpan straight-faced, threw her hands in the air, woo, DA, and laughed. I don't think she was there that day. Story 111. I came out of anesthesia and was really thirsty, but they told me I couldn't drink anything yet. Between me asking if the numbers on the machine were okay and repeating, I know I can't have a drink, but I am very thirsty. I probably drove the nurse insane. She finally brought me a wet cloth or something and I stared at it for a moment before saying, ah, yes, then started sucking on the cloth. Story 112. My dad made me steal a cookie. The nurse gave him a cookie post-op for his blood sugar, I guess, and he saw the cabinet they were in. She didn't try to hide it. So when she left the room, he was like, grab some cookies and stuff them in your purse. Hurry. I'm like, Dad, I'm pretty sure if we just ask, put them in your purse, hurry up. She's coming back, so I went ahead and stuffed a cookie or two in my purse, and when we got out to the car, I handed it over. He's like, what's this? Story 113. I donated a kidney, and when coming out of anesthesia, I said to my wife, let's get our story straight. I'm going with an escort in Tijuana. How about you? Then I passed out. She wasn't amused. Story 114. During my training, I was mentored for a month with a senior British-trained anesthesiologist. He would always ask the patient to tell their best joke to the room. Just as the patient approached the punchline, he'd slam the propofol in, and the entire room would be left hanging. This happened multiple times a day for a month. So frustrating, but he derived such joy from it. Full disclosure, he was brilliant, a patient advocate, and a great educator. Just had that one little bit of weirdness. I miss him. Story 115. Kind of the other way around here. I was getting surgery on my left shoulder and was already given the pre-op chill substances and rolled into the OR, but haven't been knocked out all the way yet. One of the docs assisting observing was a friend of mine, and while the anesthesiologist was telling me to start counting, I overheard him saying right shoulder to someone in the room. I panically mumbled what felt like shouting. No, wait, it's my left shoulder. Then my friend stood above my head, tapped my forehead, how you would for a rowdy dog, said right elbow, but don't worry about it. Then the next thing I remember is waking up back in my room, mumbling to my mom about how they did the wrong surgery. Story 116. When I was in recovery after surgery, there was a teenager recovering next to me with his parents who said, I feel like I'm on the marijuana, but I've never tried the substances before. And his dad was like, we can talk about that another time. Story 117. My 2-year-old had a hernia surgery, so he could only have clear liquids for like 12 hours before. When he came out of surgery, they gave him a little Nursette bottle of sugar water to get something in his stomach. He kept trying to stand up on the bed and yelling for more, and the nurses and I were dying laughing because he looked like a little drunk toddler who needed another drink. He drank like 6 and demanded more food back up in the room. Needless to say, the surgery was a success, and he is still running all over the place and endlessly demanding snacks. Story 118. This was an embarrassing moment. I went in for an implant for epilepsy. It was done by a neurosurgeon. I was also in a bio class. I had a test coming up next week. Under anesthesia, I kept going over the cranial nerves over and over and over again. Surgeon came in and told me I was going to do very well on my test, but I kept pronouncing one of them wrong. Not as bad as some of the others here, but I did at least get an A. Story 119. I had my gallbladder out. I was aware that there would be a gas bubble in my shoulder after surgery. Everyone warned me. My husband is a PAA and told me my shoulder would hurt a lot. I was prepared. I woke up and asked the nurse if they dropped my fat ass because they had broken my shoulder. Story 120. My father is an anesthesiologist, and his partner put me under for my tonsil and adenoids removal as a teenager. Apparently, I woke up mid-procedure to find the surgeon up in my face and huffily asked him, "Can I help you?" I remember nothing, but it became a family joke. Story 121. Went under for colonoscopy and endoscopy. When waking up, they said I had to pass gas before I could stand up. Immediately, and while making eye contact, I let out the longest fart I think I've ever made. Once I was done, I smirked and said, "Put that in your pipe and smoke it." The nurse did not appreciate that. Story 122. X-ray tech here. I've had a bunch of funny ones that I can't quite remember perfectly, but I've had more than one accuse me of being their English teacher. The kids are always funny, apologizing to their parents for being drunk and stuff when they wake up. Story 123. My mom said I woke up and started crying because my stepdad wasn't in the room with us. He couldn't be in the room though, because he had been dead for 4 years. Story 124. I was the propofol rep for 12 years and have a bunch of stories as it made people have wake-ups. The best is a guy who kept asking for Betty to come into recovery. "I need Betty. Please get Betty." When he was finally awake, the nurse said, "I will go get Betty so she can see you." His eyes got wide and he yelled, "Stop! Betty is my girlfriend. My wife is Barbara. And if she finds out I've been asking for Betty, I'm a dead man. Please don't say anything." Nurses laughed the rest of the morning about going out to get Betty. Story 125. One of my patients thought she was Pikachu. Just like Pikachu, she could only say Pikachu or variant constituent words like Pika, Chew, or repetitions like Pika, Pika, Pika. In medicine, you're not supposed to reinforce hallucinations, delusions, but I couldn't stop my staff, who responded with bubbas. It was the end of a long day for my team. Story 126. Never been put under, but my GF had a hysterectomy in February. First thing she asked me when she came to was, why wasn't I holding her? That woman had me squeeze my ass up into that hospital bed with her so she could cuddle. I had no feeling in my right arm and couldn't sleep myself, but she could. And that's all that mattered in the moment. The selfie from that is still one of our favorites. Story 127. I remember my first reaction after coming out of anesthesia when I got my wisdom teeth out was to cry about Princess Leia dying. My surgeon played the news while he worked, and that was the day that Carrie Fisher died. I must have been listening to the news subconsciously while I was out and remembered the story. Story 128. I woke up, looked at my nurse, looked at my wife and said, "I'm not an affectionate person, but my life has no meaning without your smile. I'm not affectionate. I'm not emotionally all that open. I tell her I love her all the time I care about her. But man, she's like, oh, so you can be nice and affectionate? I just need to poison you." Doctors have read it. What's the weirdest thing you've ever heard a patient say upon waking up from anesthesia? Story 1. Not a doctor, but when my buddy woke up from anesthesia, he went to the bathroom and got dressed. His girlfriend heard him sobbing after being in the bathroom for 10+ minutes and asked what was wrong. He said, through tears, that he couldn't find his other sock. She laughed and told him she would find him more socks later. When they got home, he immediately crashed on the bed and she took off his shoes so he could be comfortable. He had 2 socks on 1 foot. Bonus story. It's a gamble with him after surgeries because sometimes he cries all day, and other times he just gets really angry and tries to fight people, especially nurses. For the record, he's like 5 feet 5 inches and weighs like 130. Story 2. I recently had wisdom teeth out. I'm needle phobic, so I was terrified before going down. They gave me some gas and air, which wasn't really working. They then started pumping anesthetic through, which made me decide I was feeling brave, so I told them to stop and go for the needle. My last memory before blacking out was a Scottish nurse saying, "I'm not surprised you want us to try. You've had enough anesthesia to knock most people out. Not that you'll remember this when you wake up." Well, I did remember, and upon coming around, saw her across the room with her back to me. I decided to apologize for causing such a fuss, but it was a bit Austin Powers-esque, and it turned out I was having some trouble controlling the volume of my voice. Thus, I ended up screaming, "Sorry," from behind the poor woman, who absolutely crap herself dropped her papers, and nearly hit the floor in fright. Story 3. I was under some sort of anesthesia, getting a colonoscopy when the proctologist called in several other doctors to get a look at something on the endoscope screen. When they came into the room, I proudly announced in my best radio voice, "Welcome to my butt." Story 4. One time I went into the ER because I got hit in the head. They had to give me a spinal tap to make sure my brain parts weren't bleeding. They gave me some kind of amazing drug through my IV, and I felt really, really good. The thing they clamp onto your finger for your pulse had a red light on it. I kept saying, "Elliot, Elliot," to the nurse, like E.T., and the nurse had to leave the room because she was laughing so hard. Story 5. I'm not a doctor, but a couple of years ago, when I woke up after having my wisdom teeth taken out, I was freaking out because I was certain there was a sink that was somehow moving around by itself. I was under anesthesia, and the nurse finally calmed me down and told me not to worry by telling me that the sink always does that. Story 6. I quoted, Fahrenheit 451, according to my doctor. I was awake, but not really there, so he asked me who's the president. I answered Bush. Asked what state I was born in, I said the state of innocence. Story 7. A friend was walking me out of the hospital after a simple surgery. Supposedly, I stopped in the crowded waiting room and asked loudly, "What if this is as good as it gets?" Story 8. I woke up out of surgery twice. Once was during my wisdom tooth removal. I groaned angrily at the surgeon for hurting me, and he shushed me and told me to go back to sleep, which I did immediately. The second time was during my tonsil removal. I woke up, freaked out, and vomited blood all over myself and the surgical staff. When they finished up and rolled me out of my mom was in tears, frantic. Turns out when they pushed the morphine, I was allergic. It woke me up, made me puke, but didn't even offer any pain relief. I grabbed the nearby nurse's scrubs, pulled her down to my face level, and screamed in her face to give me some painkillers. She said they gave me the maximum dose, and it would kill me to give me more. They had to have orderlies hold me down. I blacked out for a bit and woke up crying, blind, with blood being wiped out of my eyes. I kept fighting the nurses off in terror, so they had to strap me down. The allergic reaction to the morphine caused my eyes to swell shut, and I couldn't control my instinctual urge to scratch while sedated and nearly damaged my own eyes. I'm a quite timid 20-year-old female from Canada. I was 18 when I had my tonsils removed. Story 9. My husband told me when I woke up from having my wisdom teeth removed, I was furious at the oral surgeon. I was attempting to yell at him for taking my teeth to put under his pillow, and the tooth fairy was going to give him the money my teeth had earned. He patted his lab coat pocket and said, "Perks of the job, sweetheart." Must have been a good response because my husband said I dropped it immediately. Story 10. My doctor said that I was singing show tune. I guess one of the nurses had tried to sing along and I stopped and told her she was singing flat. Story 11. After I came out of anesthesia following a colonoscopy, I apparently grabbed the nurse's hand and said very earnestly, "I don't ever want to drink that stuff again, okay?" It sounded like I was making cappuccino in the bathroom, then made the noise at her. My husband said he was astounded that I said that, because it's so unlike me. But when I topped it off by making the noise, he was laughing so hard he could barely breathe. Story 12. My dad's first colonoscopy. Doctor had a new learning something female doctor with him. My dad couldn't hold the fart that he was apparently supposed to suppress. He let one rip and heard the male doc say, "This is why we don't wear nice shoes to work." My dad crap on the nice lady's shoes. Story 13. Not a doctor, but when I underwent anesthesia for surgery on a hernia, my surgeon told me that I said, "You can't stop me, I'm made of lasers," as I fell asleep. Not only that, I said, "We need more Monroe Doctrine people," when I started to wake up. I'm very weird. Just ask any of my exes. Story 14. When my friend was having her baby, she was heavily medicated and kept yelling at everyone in the room, "Get the chicken feed! The chickens are hungry, feed them!" Disclaimer. She does not now, nor has she ever lived in a farm. Story 15. Heard the heart monitor beeping, started smiling and humming, and blurted out, "Turn it up! I love this song!" The doctor and nurses thought it was hilarious. Story 16. After I got my wisdom teeth removed, I awoke to tell the dental surgeon how Batman and Catwoman should have Bat-Cat babies. And then I convinced my brother to take me shopping. I bought a Batman movie and men's dress socks. Story 17. I had my sinuses and such fixed. I came out of surgery screaming at the doctor and nurses, "You're not finished! You're not finished! I'm awake!" Because apparently I watched too much TV and was horrified that I had woken up in the middle of surgery. The catch? I was screaming this all in German. I was still better than the guy next to me in recovery who was convinced the oxygen mask was hit him. Story 18. Waking up after an emergency C-section. Water. A split second later, "Baby?" Baby's fine. "Oh, I'm a terrible mother for thinking of water first." Story 9. When I went to get my wisdom teeth pulled, my mother was in the room with me when I was being put under. Groggily, I told the doctors to keep my teeth and give them to me after the surgery. My mother asked, "What are you going to do with them?" I said, "I will make a necklace of human teeth," and cackled. She found this less amusing than I did. When I woke up, the doctors had put my blood-encrusted molars in a little plastic Ziploc. Story 20. Not a doctor, but as I woke up from nasal surgery, I was telling the nurse all about how I forgot to unload the guns before putting them in the back of the van. She looked a tad terrified. Story 21. Not a doctor, but my cousin needed surgery after a baseball accident, and he came out of the anesthesia and said, "Mom, Emma, I'm a parallelogram." Story 22. One of my best friends woke up from his wisdom tooth removal, begging the doctor to let him be David Bowie. The doctor actually asked how that was supposed to happen, and the answer was that it would be fantastic. Sadly, I myself woke up alone, so nobody heard whatever I might have said. Story 23. Not a doctor. But when I woke up from anesthesia from an appendectomy, I loudly screamed that I was hot, stood on my bed, and ripped my gown off while my entire family was there. I also demanded that I see Luke Skywalker because he knew what was wrong with me. This could be due to my surgeon's name being Mark Hamill. Story 24. Not a doctor. I was the patient, actually. Twisting a testicle is painful, like really painful. So I'd had morphine and gas and air, and after having emergency surgery, I woke up a bit fuzzy-headed. The doctor was there and I simply asked, "Did you have to shave my balls?" Interestingly, not only did they shave my balls, but before my accident, one ball was slightly lower than the other. They kindly leveled them out during the operation. So I basically got free plastic surgery on my balls. Edit balls are meant to be different heights, apparently. Mine are not. Yay. Story 25. Not a doctor yet, but working on it. I checked up on this older lady who had a few things go wrong during surgery and had to be resuscitated and all anyway. As soon as she's awake, she tells me this: "I went and saw my husband last night. He died 5 years ago, and they're having such a nice place where he is now. It's really very comfortable and lovely. He wanted me to stay with him, but I told him I can't because I really want to see our grandson get married." It was creepy. Her daughter-in-law also work at the hospital, and it's a small town, so we all know each other, and after a few weeks, I asked how the lady is doing. Apparently, she passed away 2 days after her grandson's wedding. Story 26. When I came out of anesthesia from a surgery a couple years ago, the nurse came over to check on me, and I started telling her how awesome DuckTales is. She gave me this sort of, "Yeah, that's great" look and walked away. I got really offended that she wasn't listening to me and started singing the DuckTales theme song. DuckTales, woohoo! Story 27. I was having surgery on my right leg, woke up in the middle of the operation, and yelled to the doctor, "What are you doing to my right leg? It was the left leg," and fell back asleep. After I came out from the surgery, the doctors told me that there was about 5 seconds of pure panic in the operating room, and the doctor went pale as a sheet of paper. Story 28. I woke up in surgery once. It was weird. I was having a rod put in my femur. I broke it in half, along with my wrist. I remember seeing the tiles on the walls, the ceiling, and a few other things, and some tugging on my lower body. A drill, the sound of a hammer. I think it was a hammer. It was strange, like waking up in a dream. Someone looked over me in the eyes and said something like, "Oop," and I was out cold again. I talked to my doctor about it, and he remembered it happening. We went over it all and had a bit of a laugh about it. The same accident, I was hit by a drunk. The pain in my balls was unreal. I actually pushed one of my nuts up inside somehow and had to have it, coaxed back into place. So anyhow, after the operation, I was in recovery, and I wanted to check my junk. Manly, if I was still able to stand up and salute, or if I was going to be sitting on the sideline. Under the influence of the substances, I swiped my good hand under the sheet looking for my old friend and hit something that sent me into a world of pain, and I passed out. When I came to, I checked again with a bit of caution and found a tube. I enjoyed some panic and checked the tube again, and pain followed, and I once again passed out. Once I awoke, I decided not to go on another junk pain adventure and was clearly convinced I was the owner of a tube for a junk. With the thinking that was well influenced, it made sense to ask the first nurse that was walking by if I still had a banana. I like to think I said, "Excuse me, nurse, but am I still in possession of my manhood?" But I'm sure I said, "Oh, do I have a tube for a junk?" She lifted the sheet and said, "No, it's all there." I asked if it still worked and passed out. After that, I was poked and prodded by several nurses, doctors, teaching students, and so on. Not fun, but I was known for sporting wood for the nurses. This was while I was on morphine for a week and stuck in bed for several weeks on other medics. Story 29. After having my wisdom teeth removed, my mouth was full of gauze and blood. Talking was painful and very difficult. Still, I apparently managed to choke out how beautiful my nurse's eyes were. I'm pretty smooth. Story 30. When I came out of my first general anesthesia, they let me get up and walk myself to the bathroom before discharge. On the way back to my day surgery room, I noticed the floors were super shiny and did a running slide past the nurses in my socks. I was promptly yelled at. Story 31. I managed an oral surgery office, and we heard many funny things. Teens who confess all the things they've done without their parents' knowledge, everything from sex, parties, etc. Some of them did this with their parents sitting right there. Mostly, people just ask the same questions over and over. Am I done already? When can I go home? Am I done already? Also, always had the husbands asking us, when will my wife be recovered enough for BJS? Story 32. I went full Oprah and gleefully promised the entire operating team, along with everyone we passed in the hall, between pre-op and the OR cars. You get a car, and you get a car! I also woke up in post-op and demanded a goddamn muffin. I couldn't see anything because I had no glasses on or contacts in, but I woke up hangry and heard some nurses discussing getting a muffin for someone else. Later, I got a muffin. Story 33. Not a doctor, but I'm bored and enjoy this story. So during a severely impacted wisdom teeth removal, I was placed in a chair and on gas. Shortly after starting the gas, another nurse came and asked for my nurse, and they both left me in the room, gas flowing like crazy. I stare at the clock on the wall for 20 minutes and watch it basically melt before my eyes. I ended up tripping balls like crazy. Finally, the nurse walks back in and just yells, "Crap!" before ripping the mask off. She mumbles that we need to get me under before the doctor gets here and sees me. I feel a cold rush and out. I wake up with 3 sets of hands in and out of my mouth. I make eye contact with one of the hand's owners, who I hear say, "He's waking up." Hit him again. I feel cold, and then nothing. Next thing I know, I jump up out of the chair and proceed to try and talk to each nurse on the way out of the office. 2 try to put me into a wheelchair, but I'm not having it. I'm ducking pumped to be up. I take a much-needed piss with 4 people outside the door since they thought I might hurt myself. I then walked out to my parents' vehicle and hop into the back seat. They look back at me and ask if I'm okay. Next thing I know, I wake up 2 hours later back home. Apparently, after all the meds, they were having a bit of trouble waking me up. They gave me something that they explained to my parents as an adrenaline booster. Well, I was psyched to be awake, and so energetic, which seemed to last all the way to the car, but not before I put on my seatbelt. According to my parents, I sat down, yelled that I'm totally wide awake right now, before passing out and going headfirst into the floor of the vehicle. Story 34. After having my wisdom teeth extracted and being helped up, I had no real control over the volume of my voice. I yelled, "Whoa, floor's moving. I feel like I'm drunk." I heard the people in the waiting room laugh, along with the nurses helping me, and I shouted, "No, it really does." I don't remember being wheeled out to my brother's truck, but I do remember trying to convince him I was half lesbian because girls are pretty. He just let me keep talking, got me a strawberry milkshake, and put me in the comfy recliner at my parents' house to sleep off the last of the meds. Story 35. My husband is a scary-looking man. He's not at all, but he looks it. He's tattooed head to toe, biker, always carries a visible weapon, and always has that furrowed brow look on his face, like you've done something wrong and he's caught you. When he woke up from having all of his wisdom teeth removed, he sat up and promptly yelled, in a pretty ritzy office, "Baby, I'm high as a mother ducker." Then he proceeded to sing the Rescue Rangers theme song through the gauze stuffed in his cheeks, Chi-Chi-Chi Chip and Dale. On the way out of the office, he hugged everybody he came into contact with. He walked around the front desk to hug the receptionist and even hugged a patient waiting in the lobby. He always opens doors for me, and this was no exception. The door to the office had a bar going across it to push. He grabbed onto it and just stood there, like it was a roller coaster or something. I had to push him through. Last but not least, I'd pulled my car up to the curb in front of the office. A 20,000-year-old woman was trying to back out of a parking space across from me. It was tight, but totally doable. But this ancient human being was very close to hitting my car. My husband thought he'd speak his mind. In his head, he was yelling. In real life, he was whispering ever so softly. Whispering, "What the duck are you doing, you old idiot? You're gonna hit this ducking car, you dumb Karen." He promptly passed out upon getting into the car. He recently had a vasectomy. I was excited for the Medicaid, but they doped the crap out of him, and he was passed the duck out for hours afterwards with no shenanigans. Story 36. Not a doctor, but when I got impacted wisdom teeth and 4 molars taken out, I was given a dose of nitrous oxide prior to the main knockout stuff. So while under the influence of the nitrous, when nurse was prepping my arm to put in an IV, she said to me, "You have nice veins." To which I responded, "All the nurses tell me that," and then asked her if she wanted to go out to dinner at Steak and Shake. I then passed out. Weird, considering I'm a gay dude. Then there was some real fun. I awoke a few hours later. The oral surgeons had left me in the room alone to come to. The room had one of those motion sensor lights. So when I woke up, I was in a quiet, pitch-black room. At first, I thought I was dead, then came to the conclusion that the world had ended. I got scared and called out for help. Then my friend, who was sitting outside, came in and calmed me down. That was the most comforting hug I've ever gotten. Story 37. Before they put me under for my knee operation, I thought furiously to myself, say, did you get the license plate of the truck that hit me? When you wake up, in post-op, I groggily woke up for a moment. My tongue was very swollen. The only thing I could think of was must say something to nurse. She came over and stood over me. I said, Diffu geth the lathen's plath of truth eth hithma, over and over until I fell asleep. Woke up again in my hospital room. Story 38. Sitting in the recovery room after getting my wisdom teeth pulled, I slowly awoke and looked around the room. My girlfriend and father were sitting and then the nurse came in. I looked around and said, that's my girlfriend. For now. Story 39. Not a doctor, but I woke up from having surgery in Austria. The doctor gave me a sip of water and told me that he's sorry it doesn't taste like beer. I told him it tasted like Austrian beer. I apparently also threatened to set the anesthesiologist on fire. He was trying to help me pee, and there was just no way I was letting a stranger touch my junk. Story 40. Just underwent anesthesia 3 weeks ago for major back surgery. Apparently, I was telling the post-op nurses about how I just had the most ducked-up dream, but was very insistent they didn't need to hear it. And could I go home now? When they wouldn't let me go, apparently they needed 6 to 8 of their biggest nurses to hold me down. I don't remember any of this except for the being held down bit. Story 41. Had my tonsils taken out when I was 6. When I woke up from anesthesia, I flailed around, fell out of the bed, ran out of the recovery room and down the hall. They said I got pretty far before anyone could catch me. Story 42. When I woke up from having my wisdom teeth removed, apparently I told all of the nurses that I was a flying dude from a machine. I also texted it to every contact in my phone. I wish I knew. Story 43. Man, people have all sorts of crazy experiences with removing their wisdom teeth. My friend told me that she had this fabulous dream about a fairyland with unicorns and whatever. When they put me on the gas, I sat there bored in my chair, checking my Facebook status on my computer until I woke up to find that checking my Facebook feed was the best thing my brain could come up with while under the drug's influence. I live a sad, sad life. Story 44. When I had my second surgery on my tailbone, I don't know what they gave to me before they wheeled me into the OR, but it was absolutely amazing. I remember noticing that it was starting to work and just laughing at how good I already felt. After I woke up, I vaguely recall proposing to several of the nurses in the recovery room. I don't really know why I decided I wanted to spend my life with any of these perfectly fine people, and I'm fairly certain gender wasn't a discriminating factor in my screening process. I had another surgery later that year, and I remember waking up in the recovery room, and the first thing I did was ask every nurse I was aware of if I'd accidentally proposed to them while I was under anesthesia. A couple months after that, I had my wisdom teeth removed. Let me tell you, laughing gas will duck you right up. The first thing I remember is waking up in a wheelchair as I was being taken by a nurse to the elevator, the lead to the main entrance. I asked what happened during the procedure, and he said that I kept telling random nurses that I have a tendency to propose marriage when I've been put under. Apparently, I kept saying that if I do happen to propose to anyone, I'd prefer if they didn't say yes because I'm not actually ready for that kind of commitment. Story 45. Okay, actual doctor here who is working in anesthetics at the moment. Mostly people don't say funny things when they wake up. They moan, groan, cry, cough, and thrash about. Then they sit in recovery for about an hour and look downright miserable. Kids will scream for a bit as well. I suspect all these wacky stories that people are telling are as a result of getting some ketamine, which is occasionally used as an anesthetic agent. But given these emergence phenomena can be very disturbing, there are usually better options for the operating room. Having said all that, we have people who make a big deal about having to go pee, just won't settle at all. So put in a catheter, empty the bladder, and well, they still need to pee, won't settle, confused and agitated. People really focus on their bladders after an anesthetic, I guess. Story 46. This was told to me by my dad. My grandfather was a doctor, and he had to go in for major lung surgery. Apparently, when he was coming out of anesthesia, my dad saw him tying sutures in the air, and he loudly yelled, "Stop tying knots in those elephants' necks." Story 47. My poor mother had to get her wisdom tooth out at the age of 54, and I was responsible for her aftercare. I thought I'd left her safe and cozy, zonked out on the couch, so I went to pee. I came out of the bathroom and no mom. Mom? I searched the living room. I checked the den. I checked the guest bathroom. I poked my head up into the upstairs bedroom. No mom. Where the duck had she gone? Went back downstairs. Checked kitchen. Maybe she wanted ice. No dice. Laundry room? No. Wait, what's this? The garage door is open. My mother is standing in the dark, leaning against our deep freeze, smiling wistfully. Mom? Look at the pretty dolphins. Oh boy. Dolphins? They're leaping, so beautiful. I dragged my mother out, saying the dolphins needed to eat their mackerel before they could play. I put her back on the couch, tucked her in, and let her fall back asleep, this time with me watching her. I called Dad and relayed the story. He confirmed it. Every time my mom gets anesthesia, she trips balls and hallucinates dolphins. Story 48. After major surgery, woke up and apparently told the post-op staff I felt really high and asked if they'd like to share whatever I'd taken to achieve said euphoria. After that, I spent the next couple minutes rooting through my bed sheets, convinced that I dropped whatever I had because I couldn't find it. After a distressing few minutes, a nurse explained that I had let another patient borrow them. I was fine after that. Nurses seem to know just when a white lie is useful. Story 49. My dad brought my mom home, and she was still really drugged up. He had to do an errand, but put her on the couch and told her she needed to eat something. He got her a muffin and had to stuff pieces of it into her mouth while she was half asleep. Later on, she wakes up and notices she stored all the muffin in her cheeks instead of eating it and says, "Did I eat a bun?" "No, you ate a muffin though." It was good. And she passed out again. Classic. Story 50. So I'm told to count backwards from 10. I get past that and say I'm kind of nervous about the pain afterwards. Anesthetist then says something along the lines of, "It's okay to not like the pain. What you gotta look out for is the people who do like the pain," in her sassy Italian accent. I remember going down laughing a bit. Wake up to find my junk taped to my leg. Blood and a nurse who tells me I laugh like a choking donkey. Story 51. It was around Easter 2 years ago, and I got a colonoscopy. You can't eat for the day beforehand, and I'd had a lot of trouble drinking the laxative they had given me. We had to call the doctor and have them prescribe the little kid one instead. When I woke up, the anesthesiologist had placed a little Easter egg filled with candy by my head, and I started screaming. I was so happy I was making every one of the doctors come up and look at it and telling them it was buried treasure. My mom took me to McDonald's afterward to get me some delicious McGriddles, which I inhaled. I was so hungry. In the car, I tried to convince her I wasn't high by listing off everyone in my family's eye color. I got to my youngest sister and said, "Gracie's eyes are gray like a wolf," and then howled. Later on, I tried to steal the car to go back to McDonald's, but that's a different story. Story 52. During my mom's most recent health scare, we were all bedside on the verge of tears while she was unconscious when she rolled her head to look at us and said, "Bajillion yellow lemurs. Damn," and then went back to sleep. Some much-needed laughter ensued. Story 53. I told my parents that I felt great, and I said we should get some of the drug so I could take it later. Then tried to get up and almost smashed my face on the floor. Story 54. Nothing remarkable. But when I had my tonsils removed, they gave me anesthesia, and I remember my breathing started to go on beat with the beeping machine. And I sat up and declared to the doctor, "You got me pretty ducked up." And they responded with something along the lines of, "Yes, we did," right before they knocked me out. Story 55. When I woke up from getting tonsils and bits in my sinus fixed, my nurse came and pulled out the packing from my nose. It was 100% a tampon. Cotton tube with a string hanging down, so they could pull it back out. It hurt like a Karen when she pulled them out, but I started laughing so hard I couldn't breathe. She asked me what was so funny, and I finally choked out, "Karen, you just stole my used nose tampons," and rolled laughing some more. And when I donated bone marrow, apparently they stuck a bunch of Vaseline in my eyes to keep them closed, but didn't clean them post-surgery. So when I woke up, I couldn't see. No one was in my little curtained-off room to explain, so I immediately screamed horror movies style, "My yes! Where did my eyes go?" Apparently, I was so loud with this death scream my ride, halfway down the hall, heard my voice and came running. Scared the crap out of me. Story 56. I had arthroscopic knee surgery last year. I was still groggy as hell when I woke up, but I decided it would be hysterical to reenact the scene from Airplane, where the one patient wakes up and starts singing. So I get my head together as best I can, sit bolt upright, and start singing. "You'll be swell, you'll be great. Gonna have the whole world on a plate. Starting here, starting now. Honey, everything's coming up roses." The nurse gets this look on her face like she's concerned I've just had a stroke. My doctor is completely unfazed, turns to the nurse and says, "That's Lieutenant Circuit. Severe shell shock. Thinks he's Ethel Merman." I laugh myself senseless. Story 57. Not a doctor, but when I had surgery, I had a breathing tube put down my throat. I vaguely remember waking up in the post-op room with what turned out to be an extremely sore throat. Drugged up me decided I couldn't breathe. I remember politely informing the nurses, but they didn't seem to listen. So I started screaming, thinking I was about to die from lack of air. I remember them telling the fact that I was yelling means I'm able to breathe, but I wouldn't have it. They have me some medicine to help me breathe that knocked me back out. When I woke up later, they wanted to give me some pill that had to be taken with food. Long story short, they had to force feed me chocolate pudding that I was sure was poisonous. I barely remember all of this, and parts of it I've been told by family members. I bet I was fun to deal with. Story 58. A good buddy of mine had a funny story involving this. His dad was getting surgery on his shoulder EBIRC, and the anesthesiologist had him count backwards from 100 when putting him under. So he starts counting backwards, gets to around 91, loses track and pauses for a second, then resumes counting down from 90. Suddenly, the doctors start busting up in laughter, and he confusedly asks them why. The surgeon said, "We've never had a person continue counting like that before." Apparently, he had gone under at 91, been operated on, and upon waking up, he had just resumed counting. Story 59. My nephew was at the dentist, and he was getting a filling. He was scared of needles, so they have him laughing gas. As expected, he was laughing a lot, then tried to convince the dentist that he only speaks Spanish. Story 60. This one is me. I got clipped a few years ago, and as they're getting me ready, they start to strap my arms down. Now both arms are straight out, strapped, and I'm starting to go under. The anesthesiologist tells me the countdown thing, and I ask, "Can I say something really offensive?" She replies, "Sure," and I look up to her and say, "Forgive them, Father. They know not what they do." The last thing I hear is the doctor say, "Holy crap," and I'm gone. Story 61. Not me, but my sister just had her wisdom teeth taken out yesterday. When we first got in the car, she started bawling because she thought we were kidnapping her. Then she started complaining about how she didn't like her tongue and it was fat. I asked if she wanted a new one, and she said she wanted to get one off eBay. C also pointed to her lip and asked what it was, and when I told her, she asked what it did. At home, we lost the remote, and she said, "Just call it." Oh, and also on the way home, a school bus was passing by, and the kids were staring at her, trying to figure out what the gauze strings hanging out of her mouth were. She flicked them off. Story 62. When I woke up from major pelvic surgery, I chatted with the 2 female nurses about football. One was an Aston Villa fan and other stuff. I also commented on how the epidural I was numbed from just below the pecs down, would be great for when I'm sat at home gaming because it was relaxing, and I don't need my legs for that stuff. I also wanted to keep the little surgical beanie thingy they put on me, which in retrospect was dumb to say because it made me look like a smurf. Story 63. Got my wisdom teeth out a while back. After I had woken up, I laid there for a while, and I asked the nurse, "Are you gonna do this surgery or what?" in an angry, yelling voice. She said, "No, you're going home." And as she was helping me get in the car to go home, I yanked away from her, stating I could do it myself. In my groggy haste, I tripped. I say tripped, but it was more along the lines of a fainting type deal, and slammed my face into the car. The nurse was horrified and obviously worried about a lawsuit, and my dad came over, picked me up, and strapped me into the car and said, "You see, this is what you get for being a ducking a hole," then apologized to the lady and drove me home. Story 64. Military hospital. Woke up during a procedure just as they were cauterizing something. Smelling that, I commented that it smells like Iraq. Everybody stopped everything. Petty Officer Sandcrab Sailor. Is everything okay? Oh, Peachy, just an idle observation, then pass back out. The corpsman later told me that they were afraid I was going to PTSD all over us in his defense. I had just been in country a few weeks earlier and my face and hand were still pretty jacked up, but I thought it was hilarious. Story 65. Heard about a patient that had open heart surgery a couple days after September 11th. When he awoke after surgery, he saw his doctor, who was wearing a turban, and panicked. He thought that the Taliban had taken over while he was in surgery. He ripped all his lines out and jumped out of the bed and hid behind another patient's bed. Story 66. I woke up in the middle of an endoscopy because the anesthetic effect wore off. I panicked and tried to pull out the robotic thing crammed down my throat. It was one of the most uncomfortable experiences I've ever had. Story 67. So beforehand, in the waiting room, is one of the cutest girls I've ever seen in real life. She smiled at me, and my heart straight melted. Anyways, I wake up from the surgery and start asking about the cute, pretty girl behind the desk. Where is she? I wanted to talk to her. I eventually was yelling, "I want to talk to the pretty girl. She's so cute." Fast food. Like 3 months. And I'm telling this story to like 10 PPL at lunch in high school when I hear, "That was you?" My eyes got wide and I slowly turned to my right and recognized the girl. It was so embarrassing and awkward. I was a total sap at 15. Story 68. Not really something I said, but when I woke up after surgery, I just sort of stared absently around the room for the first 5 minutes, having no idea where I was or what I was doing. Eventually, a nurse noticed I was awake and gave a plastic cup of water. I was so out of it that I was confused what to do with the cup and eventually ended up just kind of cramming it into my face so that all the water spilled down my chest. The nurse had to clean me up and mime the motion for drinking so that I understood what to do. Looking back, it's pretty crazy. I temporarily lost the ability to drink water like some sort of terrible sitcom joke. Story 69. I had a guy who we did a procedural sedation on with Ketafol so we could reduce his dislocated shoulder. He was zombie-ish for the entire procedure, but unusually stiff. He was looking straight ahead with dead-set eyes and with his arms tensed up and out in front of him like he was driving. Well, the shoulder was in and we were just waiting for him to wake up. When he finally did, I came to check up on him and he said to me, "Doc, I had the craziest dream. You know that movie Tron? I thought I was in it and that I was riding a light cycle with my life depending on it. I made it." Story 70. Whenever I had my wisdom teeth taken out, I was put under. The first thing that I did when I woke up was an attempt to show the staff that I was in full control of my body. So I sang and did the dance to the Macarena. The Macarena was a bad choice on my part. No one knows the words to the Macarena, but having my mouth numb didn't help this cause. It sounded like a mixture of gurgling water and choking on food. At least the nurses got a kick out of a loopy 16-year-old going, "Ay, Macarena," while flailing his arms in the air. Story 71. This is a story that was told to me by my uncle, who is an anesthesiologist. One day he was putting a patient, who happened to be an attractive 20-something female, to sleep before surgery. Right before she fell asleep, she sat bolt upright and looked at a medical student in the OR who was observing and said, "I want to jump your bones." After she fell asleep, the med student simply asked, "Can I see her chart?" Story 72. My one and only time on anesthesia, my anesthesiologist said, "Okay, time for the sleepy juice." Mind you, I'm 28 years old, so I leaned to the nurse beside me and whisper, "Did he really just call it ducking sleepy Jew?" and fell asleep. After surgery, when they woke me up, I woke up, turned to the nurse, ultra slow, and said weakly, "Did I make the joke?" She laughed and said, "Yeah, buddy, you sure did." Then I said, "Oh, good," and passed back out. I have no recollection of this. I woke up to my wife and the nurse laughing at me as the nurse told my wife the story. Comedy. Story 73. Husband had total knee replacement. Post-surgery, for a week, he stayed in a haze of Dilaudid, Percocet, you name it. He became convinced he was Walt and insisted I needed to get a hold of Gus and get this product on the street. Believed he was in charge of advancing the second hand on the wall clock mentally and focused intently on doing so. Renamed Chipotle as Granola Gringo and insisted I bring him a burrito. Story 74. My friend has scoliosis. He's also the kind of cautious guy who finds a weapon and then answers the door. Even under normal circumstances, we all know that if you startle him from sleep, you have to be really careful and risk injury because he spooks so easily. He was getting surgery on his spine a few months ago and woke up from anesthesia. He came up swinging and screaming. It took 6 people to hold him down. He doesn't remember any of that, but the doctor came to him afterward and told him, "You're unnaturally strong for a man of your size." It was something I wouldn't have believed coming from anyone else. Story 75. When my best friend was coming out of anesthesia, after having her wisdom teeth removed, she was convinced that she was a superhero named Chapstick Woman. Her job was to smear chapstick all over everyone to save world. She ended up covering her sister's face with cherry chapstick. Story 76. After I had my wisdom teeth removed, they sat me up in this chair so the anesthesia could wear off. I tried standing up a few times in my newly awakened drugged state, and the nurses would rush over to tell me to sit back down. After a few attempts, I finally got to my feet, and the nurses came over to sit me back down. I responded by saying, "No, it's okay, I got this." I must have appeared convincing enough because they backed off a bit. I then took a step forward and fell flat on my face. I didn't even try to catch myself. My nose broke on impact. Story 77. I went into the hospital on Christmas Eve for an emergency appendectomy, and when I woke up, it was Christmas. First thing I said to everyone, including my grandma, was "Merry Ducking Christmas." Story 78. When my eldest brother was getting his wisdom teeth taken out, he had just watched that horror movie about someone who woke up during surgery but couldn't move or do anything, and as fate would have it, he did wake up during the surgery. Though unlike the movie, he had complete control over his heavily drugged body, and in his drugged state, he decided that his best chance to communicate was to yell as loud as he possibly could in an effort to break through or whatever. Well, the sound of equipment hitting the floor, coupled with the multiple shrieks of terrified nurses, let him know that he was heard. Story 79. After having surgery for a collapsed lung, the doctor stuck a chest tube in me to drain the fluids. I was in the hospital for 4 days, and every hour they gave me morphine, Toradol, and 2 Percocets. Different med every hour, plus Ambien to sleep at night. I was hitting on all the nurses and asked one of them to marry me. She said, "No, but I will go on a date with you." I declined, still kicking myself in the ass for that. Story 80. I had a colonoscopy. When they do that, they inflate your butt with a lot of air so they can see what's going on in there, which of course leaves a hell of a lot of gas afterwards. I was in the recovery room when an old lady who also just had a colonoscopy was wheeled in. There were 2 gastroenterologists working that day, and she farted really huge. In my drugged state, I gently tugged on the nurse's sleeve and said, "I can beat that." I then proceeded to blow that old lady out of the water, more than once. Story 81. My friend had oral surgery last year. His roommate took him to the grocery store on the way home to pick up some juice and other post-surgery foods. In the middle of an aisle, my very doped-up friend sat down on the floor. When his roommate told him he should get up so they could go find the juice, he said, "We'll roll there," and tried to start rolling down the aisle. He also confused a box of Band-Aids for a box of condoms and got very excited that they make SpongeBob condoms. Story 82. When I came out of anesthesia, I heard a lot of groaning coming from somewhere else in the room. I was in a big room with at least a half dozen other patients all coming out of anesthesia. I was disturbed by this really weird noise and asked, at the top of my voice, "Who the duck is groaning? It's really ducking annoying." My mom told me to be quiet. Turns out, it was the groans of a severely mentally handicapped girl who was just waking up as well. Her parents weren't very happy. Story 83. I never said anything weird, but apparently after I got my wisdom teeth taken out, when my sister came to help me into my chair at home, I pulled her down and proceeded to pet her like a cat for 20 minutes. She just went with it, too. Story 84. When I got my wisdom teeth out, they put me under. After the procedure, I was still really sleepy. Apparently, the dentist told me, "All right, the pain, time to wake up," which I responded with a ducking make me and promptly fell back asleep. Apparently, deep down, I'm just a git. Story 85. I was having eye surgery, which they wanted me awake for, and gave me some substances that made it a surprisingly pleasant experience. There was a part, though, where they put me under briefly to give me the shot that would freeze my eye muscles. When I came back around, the nurses were chatting about the cute things their children say. I remember wanting to let them know I was awake, so I said, "Yeah, I remember the first time my daughter looked me in the eye and said, 'Dad, you're in a hole,' Story 86. A friend of mine broke his arm snowboarding. He woke up when a bunch of folks were visiting, noticed that his gown was exposing his chest, and tried to say, 'This is indecent, my nipples are showing,' but just mumbled a bit and shouted 'nipples.' Later on, he got really excited that his meal came with a chocolate muffin for dessert. When he had finally choked down his hospital food, he accidentally reached for the muffin with his broken arm and smacked it across the room, startling the nurse. Story 87. Since my father can barely stand driving by a hospital, he had to be put under for his colonoscopy. After coming to, he kept thanking the doctor for his probe and asked for another over and over again. Story 88. This should be addressed to nurses of Reddit. Media has you fooled to who actually spends any time with the patient. A doctor isn't likely to see a patient again after the surgery for quite a while after they have been awake. Story 89. I'm a surgical tech at a local hospital. I had a patient that requested local anesthetic instead of sedation for a minor procedure since she wanted to watch. The anesthesia team and doctor obliged. She proceeded to wrestle me the whole case, freaking out, belligerent, whole 9 yards. I had to basically lay on her to keep the sterile field sterile. When the procedure was finished, she stated that even though she wasn't given sedatives, she didn't remember a thing. All she remembered was being abducted by aliens. Story 90. My granddad, Wee pilot, heard a rescue helicopter land on the hospital roof as he was waking up. He cut his catheter and drip lines with his pocket knife, hid behind the door, and decked the first nurse that came in the door. Story 91. An adult student of mine went in for minor surgery. It is common to hold the patient for an hour or so while coming off of the anesthetic, but she said they held her for 2 hours because she wouldn't stop singing The Lion King. I laughed at this for weeks when she corrected me and said it wasn't the song from The Lion King, it was a song she was making up about The Lion King. Story 92. After my colonoscopy, I was wheeled into the ward. There was a family visiting a patient 2 beds away from me. At this point, my bowels were still inflated from the procedure. I look at the family, say hello, and then let out the longest fart ever. And it wasn't just one. It was almost continuous. I was so distraught I started shouting, "I'm so sorry," as my farts ripped through the ward. Story 93. I had to have one of my teeth pulled several years ago. When I was picked up after the procedure, I was sobbing and very distressed. The problem was that I really wanted my tooth so that I could make a necklace out of it. Denying me my tooth was going to affect my status in the tribe if I couldn't make my necklace. I finally calmed down after my friend promised me one of his. Story 94. Not a doctor, but when I had my wisdom teeth removed, I said something about saving the sharks from the surgeon because he had a moose head and several bucks mounted in the waiting room. I was really upset about the shark being next, but the nurse told me that the shark had gone home to his family because it was dinner time and all was well. Story 95. Not a doctor, but apparently last year after my colonoscopy, I asked the doctor if he thought my butthole was beautiful and if he liked it. A little bit later, I told my wife I was starving and wanted to order pizza. She says I called the pizza place and kept arguing with them. No, I don't want sausage on my pizza. I just want a large pizza with sausage on it.